As human beings, we are instinctively drawn toward the grandeur of the natural world, to spectacular displays that inspire us with their magnitude and power. During moments like these, we are understandably filled with a genuine sense of awe. Yet nature's most stunning revelations aren't always defined by sheer force or physical scale. For often, in secluded corners of our planet, many of Earth's greatest wonders take center stage. Wonders of rare beauty and complexity, creativity and design. Wonders born on the gossamer wings of an insect weighing less than an ounce.
As you watch a butterfly, to describe what you're looking at, you can't really put it into words. And I said to myself, I want to be part of that. That is the coolest thing. That's biology, it's also magic.
When you hold a living butterfly in your hand for the first time, maybe you've netted it or you picked it off a flower or something, and here's this incredibly beautiful organism, intricately shaped with its feet and antennae and all these things moving at once.
Every one of these 20,000 species have different color patterns, and every one of them has different shaped wings. The diversity is just so magnificent. If I was the greatest artist in the world, there was no way I could come up with all of these patterns. I mean, it would be just absolutely impossible.
If you open the work of a lepidopterist, someone who studies butterflies, somewhere in that writing, you're going to find the language of astonishment. The fact that it goes through a caterpillar stage and then becomes this mysterious chrysalis, out of which this flying creature emerges, has captured the imagination of people since antiquity.
Throughout history, butterflies have touched the human mind and soul on levels both scientific and philosophical. 3,500 years ago, Egyptian artists studied their anatomies and then rendered them as icons of beauty and perfection of form. In Aztec and Mayan folklore, the insect symbolized life and death. And to the ancient Greeks, Psyche, the word for butterfly, literally meant the soul. Today, terms like magical and miraculous are often used to describe their mysterious life cycles. For almost every butterfly, it is a cycle that begins, often hidden from the eyes of the world. Depending upon its species, a female butterfly can lay hundreds of eggs during her brief lifetime. Each initiates an extraordinary process of growth and transformation.
The eggs are remarkable in themselves. They have species-specific architectures, some of which are just astonishing. For instance, if you look at a monarch egg, it has a beautiful symmetrical structure. It looks like a little miniature dome or cathedral.
Ranging in size from a pinhead to the width of a child's fingernail, each egg is attached to a plant by an adhesive fluid secreted by the butterfly. They are lined with a coating of wax that helps keep them moist and viable. Each egg is deposited on a specific species of plant called a host. These host plants are the only source of food a butterfly's offspring will eat. So accurate identification of their leaves and branches is crucial, and the females are well equipped for the task.
The perception that they have of the odor of those plants is just overwhelming. So they can find those plants for miles, and then once it gets near its host plant, it can tell that the odor is getting stronger and stronger. Then it begins to focus on leaf shape. Instinctively, it knows what leaf shape its host plant has. And it begins to taste. And it tastes with its feet, with its forelegs. They drum the leaves, they scratch the leaves, and then they use their proboscis to taste the scratch. They also smell with their antennae. So they've got the legs, they've got their proboscis, they've got their antennae. They have all these mechanisms to make sure that it's the right plant. If it's the wrong plant, their caterpillars are going to die. Butterflies just don't make mistakes. I mean, it's just amazing. It's one of the greatest wonders of nature to watch how this female can do all of this from such great distances.
In many species, the eggs hatch within a week. Then the newly emerged caterpillar, or larva, wastes no time embarking on the second stage of its journey to adulthood.
We call them eating machines because that's their only purpose in life, is to just eat and grow, eat and grow.
A really hungry, busy caterpillar, you can actually hear it eating. It sort of reminds you of corn on the cob, because it bites along and then it bites along some more.
It's just munch, 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 munch. Slice and chew, slice and chew, to build up the raw materials for the next stage of life.
A caterpillar could gain in weight so fast that it would be eating its own weight in leafy material every day.
Equipped with powerful jaws and a digestive tract that extends the length of its body, this stomach with legs can multiply its birth weight more than 3,000 times in less than 2 weeks.
To show you how remarkable this weight gain is, imagine you had an 8-pound human baby and he multiplied his weight 3,000 times as he was growing. That would be a 24,000-pound child. That's a big kid.
A caterpillar's growth is punctuated by violent surges of transition called molts.
Imagine the outer skin of a caterpillar as being sort of like a wetsuit. It's got a little bit of stretch to it, but limited. It's waterproof, so they don't dehydrate. Now, as the caterpillar grows, it fills out that wetsuit, and eventually it reaches a point where it can't grow anymore, and it has to make a new, larger version on the inside.
A molt begins when a caterpillar spins and then grasps a silk pad, anchors its body securely with small barbs on its legs, and splits its skin near the capsule covering its head.
There are sensors in the cuticle, in the skin of the caterpillar, that are strain detectors. They detect the amount of pressure or strain being put on the skin. And when that is too great, they send a signal to the brain of the caterpillar, which then releases a hormone that causes molting.
A caterpillar will undergo 4 or 5 molts. Its rapidly growing body is composed of 2 distinct cell populations: the larval cells that form all of its organs and enable it to function, and the imaginal cells that ensure its future as a butterfly.
In the later instars of the caterpillar, one can begin to see what are called imaginal discs. Now these are the precursor cell populations for what will become wings and legs or sensory structures in the adult.
Most of these imaginal cell clusters develop in pairs and are positioned throughout the caterpillar's body in locations that correspond to the organs they will eventually help form in the adult.
Imaginal discs are precursors that are there and waiting. They're set aside to make adult structures. And at a certain point in development, those cells are triggered to start to grow.
As the end of the larval stage approaches, the caterpillar stops eating, finds a secluded spot, and spins another silk pad. When finished, it attaches itself with a pair of claspers on the end of its body, then hangs almost motionless.
It will hang there for a day or so, usually in a J position. All kinds of chemical reactions occur within that caterpillar. It changes color and you have no idea what's going on inside there until all of a sudden it pumps the fluid so that the skin begins to split.
The caterpillar's final molt marks the beginning of the third stage of a butterfly's development and the appearance of a remarkable structure called a chrysalis. As the old skin is pushed away, the cremaster, a thin extension on the top of the chrysalis, works its way into position to permanently grasp the silk pad. With a scanning electron microscope, the cremaster is magnified more than 500 times.
The caterpillar has microscopic hooks on the cremaster, and it attaches those hooks to that silk pad that it puts on the bottom of a leaf or twig. And it begins to spin, and this caterpillar spins and spins and spins because it wants to get rid of that old skin that it has.
During the hour that follows, the chrysalis hardens and takes its final form as one of the most fascinating processes in nature is set into motion: the metamorphosis from caterpillar into butterfly.
What you see in a chrysalis is not a shapeless mass, but in fact something very much like a mold for the adult butterfly.
You see the wing pads where the adult wings are going to form, and you see the head and the compound eyes appear, visible through the outer case of the pupal shell. Abdominal segments are very clearly separated from the thoracic segments where the wings are going to be attached. All of this is astoundingly new compared to the caterpillar, where everything looked sort of the same down the whole length of the body.
This transition from an earthbound plant-eating arthropod with limited vision and mobility into a beautiful winged insect that feeds on nectar, navigates with exceptional senses, and can fly 50 miles in a day is truly a marvel of the natural world. Exactly how it happens is still very much a mystery. Yet innovative research at the level of molecules and cells provides intriguing new clues.
There is some continuity of tissues from caterpillar to adult butterfly, but most of what was there in the caterpillar is going to disappear and be turned into new structures that have no analog in the caterpillar. For instance, there's nothing like the compound eye of the adult butterfly present in the caterpillar. There's nothing like the proboscis present in the caterpillar, or the long articulated legs in the caterpillar. So these are all novel structures that are going to be built.
In a metamorphic insect, what you've got is two body plans. You have to first form one functional body plan, and then you have to switch gears and you have to take and form a new body plan. I am amazed by development when it goes from egg to caterpillar, because it's such an intricate process. But then you have to enter into the chrysalis stage and you have to get it right again. So it's like the problem squared.
The creation of a butterfly begins with the partial destruction of the caterpillar. Inside the chrysalis, larval cells that form the caterpillar's limbs and organs are systematically digested and broken down.
You've got to get rid of or digest the caterpillar tissues. They won't work for the adult. In fact, the cells themselves disappear, but then their components are recycled and are turned into a kind of soup out of which the adult structures will be built.
Throughout this process, the imaginal cells, the foundation of the adult insect's body, are preserved to differentiate and multiply.
Now, cell death is programmed. It's not something that happens by accident. If you kill the wrong cells, you're in deep trouble.
It's very carefully engineered. You're going to save some of the cell populations, so you got to know where you're going to end up before you start. You don't want to digest everything, just things that need to be eliminated. Then the imaginal discs rapidly begin to proliferate, and you can trace a continuous pathway into the pattern on the wing.
This timeless drama of death and renewal is performed in the seclusion of the chrysalis, without audience or applause. During the past 2 decades, scientists have worked diligently to pull back the curtain.
I've been at this about 15 years, and the possibility of somehow getting in there to photograph what's inside a chrysalis, that question was out there all along, and it occurred to me that magnetic resonance imaging might be perfect tool to use to see what goes on inside a chrysalis.
The challenge of visually documenting a butterfly's development led biologist Richard Stringer to Duke University and its Center for In Vivo Microscopy. There, over a 10-day period, monarch butterfly chrysalises were scanned throughout a complete cycle of metamorphosis. Each scan visually sliced the chrysalis into more than 200 sections. 8 hours into the first day, Stringer observed significant changes.
Even though it was very early in the development of the chrysalis, you could already see things forming that were going to be part of the butterfly, including the head, including the brain, including leg muscles, wings, antennae. The longer it's scanned, the more detail you get.
Stringer's magnetic resonance data was later used to create a 3-dimensional dissection of the butterfly's body as it took shape within the chrysalis. On day 1, the caterpillar's massive digestive tract is still nearly full size. By the 10th day, hours prior to the butterfly's emergence, the tract has been totally reconstructed. It is now about 25% of its original volume, ideal for the adult insect that will feed almost exclusively on nectar. During this transformation, the butterfly's reproductive organs, non-existent in the caterpillar, develop completely, while its tube-like heart is remodeled to fit and function within the abdomen of the butterfly. In the front of the chrysalis, dramatic anatomical changes continue. The caterpillar's simple eyes, capable only of discerning darkness and light, are replaced by large, complex organs of vision. A muscular system that will power flight and locomotion is built from both imaginal and recycled larval cells. The butterfly's 6 legs, 2 antennae, and feeding tube are individually formed while tightly compacted into a mass against the wall of the chrysalis. And 4 wings, each with elaborate networks of veins and scales, are shaped, decorated, and refined in less than 2 weeks.
It's like a different organism. And as the week goes on, transitions have to take place in the heart. Transitions have to take place in the antennae. Transitions have to take place in the reproductive organs. You got a big orchestra in there. You got a great big orchestra, and you got a conductor, some conducting force that's responsible for it all. I can say without any doubt that it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen.
Caterpillar into butterfly. The transformation to an entirely new way of living is nearly complete. During the first moments after emergence, the butterfly makes final preparations to fly and eat as it finishes construction of its proboscis and wings.
The proboscis is a straw-like tongue, hollow in the middle, and the butterfly has muscles in its head which can create a suction, a sort of a suction pump, and draw nectar up.
Within the chrysalis, the proboscis developed as 2 separate pieces. Now, immediately following emergence, the butterfly must assemble them into a single unit, or die of starvation.
It's 2 half straws. There's a channel on one side and has to get it into the channel the other side. You'll see two little appendages on their head called palpi, and those palpi seem to protect the proboscis and help that proboscis get put together.
As the butterfly knits together the proboscis, its wings also take on their final structure.
When the butterfly comes out of the chrysalis, the wings are like velvet. They're soft, they're pliable. There's veins, the wings are filled with veins.
What the butterfly does is, using its abdominal muscles, pumps hemolymph, fluid, into the veins, into the wings, and they quickly expand to their full size and shape.
Each of the butterfly's 4 wings is covered with thousands of microscopic scales that are positioned like shingles on a rooftop. These scales are not only arranged for aerodynamic efficiency and spectacular patterns, they also act as solar panels, collecting heat to warm the flight muscles of the cold-blooded insect. A butterfly's eyes are also formed from a vast network of component parts. Thousands of hexagonal light receptors work in unison to produce a mosaic view of the insect's environment. While the spherical shape of each compound eye creates a field of view more than 180 degrees wide.
They have 4 color vision systems, pigment systems, which enable them to see from the ultraviolet to infrared. Butterflies have better color vision than humans.
The butterfly's antennae, legs, and feet complete its sensory system. The antennae that control balance and equilibrium in flight recognize the aromas most important to the butterfly. Their clubbed ends are covered with scales that can detect the scent of a host plant or prospective mate more than a mile away. A butterfly has 3 pairs of jointed legs with scales and fine hairs that sense vibrations and possibly sound, while its legs and claws are lined with nerve cells that react upon touch to a leaf's distinct flavor. This heightened sense of taste is activated whenever the insect scratches the surface of a plant.
Some of the best biologists and chemists in the world are now studying the process of metamorphosis on a series of new levels, trying to integrate this with the advances and techniques that we have from molecular biology to modern imaging systems.
In the case of butterflies, it's like a fine piece of art. You can appreciate it at a sort of technical level in terms of what was required to get the pigment on the canvas and so forth. But what's going on is so much richer than that and so much more significant than that.
We know just the bare outlines of a few of the processes involved for metamorphosis. It's a mystery. It's like a black box. Input larva, black box. Output butterfly. What happened? What happened?
We only know a thousandth of what's going on inside those insects, inside that pinhead brain, and all the things that it can do, the way it can navigate, the way it can migrate, the way it can find the females, the way it can find the plant. It's one of the great wonders of the world.
As science probes deeper into the life cycles of the 20,000 species of butterflies known to inhabit the Earth, one story stands unique from any other. It is an epic saga that unfolds across a continent and a journey to the heart of the beauty and mystery that epitomize metamorphosis. For more than 30 years, researchers from throughout the world, including biologist Thomas Emmel, have traveled to a secluded forest to study a phenomenon unparalleled in nature: the monarch butterfly's migration to Mexico.
I've gone down every year since 1981, and many years made a number of trips, 2, 3, 4 trips a year. Here's a butterfly species that does something truly spectacular. Just imagine 300 million monarchs in one site that have flown 2,500, 3,000 miles to end up in these tiny 12 areas that still exist in the transvolcanic range of south central Mexico.
The monarch's migration begins each September when most of the North American population east of the Rocky Mountains departs for central Mexico. Their journey can span more than 2,500 miles and is critical for 2 reasons. Monarchs are tropical butterflies unable to endure the freezing winter temperatures of the Midwest and Canada, and their life cycle depends upon the milkweed. More than 100 species of milkweed grow throughout the United States during the spring and summer. It is the only plant a female monarch will select to host her eggs. Milkweed leaves contain cardiac glycosides, toxic chemicals that can cause illness or death. After hatching, the caterpillar eats the plants and stores their poisons in its outer layer of skin. Then during metamorphosis, the glycosides are transferred from caterpillar to adult. And whenever the monarch spreads its wings, their distinctive pattern sends a warning to predators. Don't eat me. I taste terrible. Like the monarch, milkweed cannot survive the harsh North American winter, and by the end of August, it goes to seed.
And at that point, the monarch stops all reproductive activity. If it's a female, no more eggs. If it's a male, no more sperm. They still feed, are active, but they show no interest in sex or reproduction.
With no milkweed for their eggs until spring, the monarchs devote themselves entirely to preparation for a transcontinental flight. They spend the final weeks of summer feeding on nectar to build reserves of carbohydrates and fats, the fuel for their journey. Monarchs born in the spring or early summer have a lifespan of only 2 to 4 weeks. But the generation that emerges in August is genetically programmed to live up to 9 months, a provision crucial to survival.
The last generation of the summer, the one that's going to live all winter and into the following spring, is really an interesting problem for biologists, because here you have 2-3 generations preceding that generation where the adult lives at most 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then dies. And now all of a sudden a generation's produced that's going to live 9 months, 9 times as long. It's thought that there's a genetic difference comprised of about 6 genes that are unique in this generation that enable it to live that long.
Often called the Methuselah generation, their longevity will enable the butterflies to fly south for 8 weeks, endure 4 months of winter, and then start the return trip north to establish a new generation of monarchs in the spring. With the approach of autumn, the angle of the sun at midday drops below 56 degrees. The shortening days are the butterflies' cue to begin their migration. A network of sensory organs will enable them to navigate throughout the journey south.
The question is how the butterfly figures out what direction to go. We're looking at several things. The butterfly is able to detect day length through tiny organs on its antennae. It's able to detect the position of the sun above the horizon by visual senses, and also compensate with a biological time clock in its brain for the movement of that sun from early in the morning on the eastern horizon to the western horizon at the end of the day when it sets. So they're moving south, following the sun's directions, and they're adjusting their flight each day.
From as far north as Canada, Michigan, and Maine, the monarchs travel an average of 50 miles a day as they glide on currents of warm thermal air. By mid-October, their primary migration routes converge, as most of the butterflies funnel into southern Texas before crossing the border. Some, however, take a more direct route across the Gulf of Mexico. In late October, on evenings following the passage of a cold weather front, monarchs descend upon the gas and oil rigs throughout the Gulf. Perhaps attracted by the lights, the butterflies interrupt the longest non-stop leg of their journey. Here, among the pipes, ropes, and heavy machinery, they rest for the night. In 1993, biologist Gary Ross and a team of volunteers documented monarchs on more than 20 platforms during a 2-week period. At daybreak, the butterflies warmed their flight muscles, calculated their bearing by the position of the sun, and then resumed their journey. After crossing the southern border of Texas, the eastern monarch population merges into a flyway about 50 miles wide. During this leg of their migration south, they follow the geography of the Sierra Madre Oriental mountain range. Then, near a region called the Sierra Gorda, they abruptly change direction and cut through a pass heading southwest toward the interior of Mexico.
And there they find the end of the desert and the start of a transverse mountain range that runs west-east, and that's the Transvolcanic Range.
The Transvolcanic is the tallest range in Mexico. Its mountains contain rich deposits of heavy metals that may play an important role in the monarch's navigation.
Gold, iron, manganese, copper, all of these metals created an anomalous magnetic field. And this seems to be important in bringing the monarchs in, because the monarchs have tiny particles of magnetite, the mineral magnetite, in their body at the base of the wing and in the thorax and abdomen. And these are believed to help them navigate to precisely this mountain range, because there's a very strong magnetic anomaly as one approaches this range due to all these heavy metals near the surface. So the particles of magnetite rotate like a little bar magnet inside a cell, and that cues the monarch that needs to head in a certain direction.
Until late in the 20th century, the only people to ever observe the butterflies' arrival in Mexico were the farmers and miners who lived and worked in these volcanic mountains. Then, on January 2nd, 1975, in a forest 70 miles west of Mexico City, a spectacular discovery opened the door for the rest of the world. Millions of monarch butterflies had gathered in a forest of Oyamel firs 10,000 feet above sea level. Frederick Urquhart, a Canadian biologist who devoted his career to the search for this colony, described it as a glorious, incredible place where butterflies swirl through the air like autumn leaves, shimmering against the mountain sky and drifting across our vision in a blizzard of orange and black. Science now glimpsed the true magnitude of the eastern monarch's migration.
One of the really remarkable things about this migration is that all of these individuals have never made the trip before. It was their grandparents or great-grandparents 2, 3, 4 generations ago. They have no leader who has made the trip before, unlike whooping cranes or sandhill cranes. They don't have an older, experienced adult to take the lead and show them where to go, where to stop at night. But in the end, it ends up on the very same trees, same area, same slope of the mountain that its parents and grandparents left from the previous year.
Since 1975, a dozen permanent overwintering colonies have been discovered in these mountains. Each maintains a critically balanced microclimate that helps sustain the monarchs until spring. Average temperatures in the colonies range from 35 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough to protect the insects from freezing, and cool enough to minimize their expenditure of energy. For more than 4 months, hundreds of millions of butterflies live in a state of semi-hibernation while slowly consuming the reserves of nutrients they accumulated during the summer. The bark and needles on the fir trees provide stable footholds, and by flocking in roosts several layers deep, they can endure days or weeks of inclement weather. With the arrival of spring, the insects prepare to depart the overwintering sites. After the sun warms the colony, the monarchs leave their roosts for a few hours each day. They travel short distances in search of nectar and water that will nourish them during their journey north. At lower elevations, they feed on the new bloom of wildflowers and draw moisture from the damp grass and the rivulets that run down from the mountains. The lengthening days also trigger a change in the monarch's biology. In early March, the butterfly's reproductive organs become active as the males produce sperm and the females eggs. After mating, they leave the colonies and head north, ready to establish a new generation. The monarch's departure from Mexico coincides with the appearance of a new crop of milkweed in southern Texas. When the females find the host plants, they lay their eggs. Their life cycle now complete, they will soon die. Throughout the spring and summer, successive generations of monarchs, each living about 4 weeks, follow the milkweed as it grows progressively across the Midwest and into southern Canada. Then in late August, near a dairy farm in Minnesota or a lakeshore in Ontario, butterflies from a new Methuselah generation emerge, ready to undertake the Great Migration once again.
The series of steps that the monarch takes during this trip, both coming south and going north again in the spring, is truly astounding. Here's an insect moving by the billions between 3 countries. To imagine a tiny brain the size of a monarch brain being able to carry all the information that it needs to make this 2,500-mile trip, adjusting daily for the movement of the sun as it drops lower on the horizon, getting near the overwintering site in Mexico and somehow ending up in the same mountain range that their grandparents came from the previous spring. But that tiny brain puts all of this together. It is a wonderful mystery. It's going to attract scientists' attention for many, many decades or centuries to come. And we're only beginning to understand how miraculous this is.
It's impossible to look at a caterpillar turning into a butterfly and not ask how. Their metamorphosis, their migration, their life cycle. How did this happen? How is it regulated? How is it controlled? This astonishing, remarkable transformation. A biologist who encounters a puzzle-like metamorphosis is going to view that puzzle through an analytical filter, a lens. It's a way of trying to understand the problem. And for most biologists, that lens is going to be an undirected evolutionary process.
Since the late 19th century, most explanations for the life cycle of a butterfly or any other organism have shared a basic premise. To be considered scientific, they must rely exclusively upon undirected natural causes. This view was first published by Charles Darwin in his theory of evolution through random variation and natural selection. And today, it is widely accepted as a foundation of modern biology. But can such a theory account for the origin of metamorphosis?
On the evolutionary view of life, in particular on the Darwinian view of life, everything that an organism does, every feature that it has, all of its details ultimately relate to the requirements of natural selection. So to build the first butterflies, natural selection would have had to work entirely through genetic mutations. They're the raw materials of evolution.
A mutation is an error in the DNA of a living organism, an alteration of the genetic code. The theory of natural selection contends that the accumulation of mutations over enormous periods of time fuel the evolution of all complex life on Earth.
Generally speaking, mutations are mistakes. It's a change to the DNA, and these mutations happen in a random way. They're not guided or directed to happen in the right order, in the right sequence, in the right time.
There's no foresight involved in this process, no vision of what the organism needs in the future. Now, there's a real problem with that, especially when you consider the single most important element of metamorphosis, the chrysalis.
A butterfly chrysalis connects two fundamentally different ways of living. It is both a bridge and a workshop, where one type of organism is transformed into another. The magnitude of this transformation has been compared to a Model T Ford that suddenly encases itself within a garage. Inside, most of the car breaks down into fragments of metal, rubber, and glass. These pieces then reorganize themselves into components more complex than any that previously existed in the Model T. After several days, the garage door bursts open and a radically different mode of transportation lifts off into the sky.
Now, an analogy like that is pure whimsy. But even if it were somehow possible, I don't think turning a car into a helicopter would be nearly as impressive as the actual transformation that takes place inside a chrysalis.
From the moment the chrysalis is formed, caterpillar tissues are destroyed and then recycled to help build wings, compound eyes, reproductive organs, and navigational systems of stunning beauty and efficiency. Yet despite the importance of cell death in the chrysalis, the origin of the process defies the basic logic of natural selection.
One of the fundamental requirements of natural selection is reproduction. You've got to be able to make copies of yourself, in particular of your genes. You've got to be able to pass them on. But a chrysalis, unless it represents a bridge to something yet to come, is really a casket. If you're a caterpillar, you're entering your own grave. Turning most of your body into a molecular soup would be suicide.
A caterpillar, unless it makes it through to the adult, is no good because it can't reproduce. You're not going to have offspring, and so you're a dead-end street evolutionarily. So it wouldn't be any benefit at all to kill yourself unless you've got a hidden plan up your sleeve. You know, like, okay, I know I can go ahead and commit suicide because there's a new me waiting to happen.
The caterpillar is not going to enter the chrysalis without simultaneously knowing, I've got a plan for getting out of this. I'm heading towards the adult butterfly. I'm going to reconstitute these tissues in the adult form, emerge, and go on my way. But that's not how natural selection operates. It can't look into the future and somehow anticipate what an evolving organism is going to need in a week or a month or 1,000 years from now. So if the first caterpillars were evolving into existence, without foresight, it's highly unlikely natural selection would retain a destructive process like cell death.
This absence of foresight is not the only challenge to Darwinian theory. Biologists have long recognized that natural selection cannot succeed by taking large evolutionary leaps. Instead, the process can only move forward through a series of small, incremental steps.
In evolution, it's the smaller scale changes that have a better chance of being passed on because they're relatively limited in their scope. That means they're disrupting less, and they're more likely to be tolerated by the organism. But when it comes to the origin of metamorphosis, the notion of gradual evolutionary change comes to a dead end.
By its very nature, metamorphosis is an all-or-nothing proposition. And throughout biological history, its success is hinged upon the immediate availability of a full set of instructions, including genes, proteins, and the developmental program required to integrate them.
It all has to be in place ahead of time. It needs to have the genes in place, the regulatory elements that are going to turn the genes on and off. It has to have all the cells pre-programmed to do what they're going to do when the time comes, so they respond to the signals they get in the right way. The larval cells have to know they're going to die. You got to remember the caterpillar isn't thinking about things. It's not saying, okay, now it's time to dissolve my epidermis, and okay, what about that gut? Got to get working on that gut. No, it has to happen rapidly and in a coordinated fashion. Once you're committed to the chrysalis stage, there's no going back. You have to complete the transition.
A caterpillar that's equipped to go 10% or 25% of the way through metamorphosis is no way through metamorphosis. Part way into a process that requires getting out the other side as a fully formed adult doesn't work.
You have to recreate adult legs, adult antennae, adult eyes. You have to change the shape of the brain and the connections between the antennae and the eyes. You have to reformat the gut so that it switches from eating plant material to eating nectar. How many mutations does it take? And how do you coordinate all of that? If you get the eyes right, but the gut wrong, it's a failure as a butterfly. If you get the wings right and the legs right, but the muscles don't attach, that butterfly's going nowhere. It's dead. You begin to see the depths of the problem. So for evolution to have created this sort of pathway gradually, it would take a miracle.
Metamorphosis, if it came into existence at all by an undirected process, had to have done so in one fell swoop. Natural selection, by definition, I would say, cannot build that kind of process. To create a process like metamorphosis, you'd need a totally different type of cause. Something that could see a distant target, keep that target in focus, and provide all the resources necessary to hit the bullseye on the first shot. I think the only cause that could have accomplished that is an intelligent agent.
From a philosophical perspective, the suggestion of intelligent design as the explanation for the origin and development of life contradicts the assumptions of many biologists. But when considered objectively, evidence may be plentiful within the walls of a chrysalis or on a monarch's wings.
Metamorphosis not only challenges the Darwinian picture of life, in fact, it points in a positive way to the truth of intelligent design. If you saw a mechanical device of the sophistication of a butterfly, you would not for a moment hesitate to ascribe that to intelligence, because the butterfly is so much more sophisticated, almost beyond our comprehension, than anything that we make. Planning, foresight, artistry, engineering. Normally in our experience, when we see those criteria fulfilled, we see those indicators, we say that's positive evidence of intelligent design. To build a butterfly, you need a cause that can visualize a long-range objective and then direct every step of the process that's required to make it happen. Only intelligence, universally in our experience, is capable of doing that. You also need a cause that can reuse lower-level component parts to construct a different, higher-level system. For butterflies, the same genes and proteins that build you a caterpillar can be reused to give you an adult flying insect. As Nobel Prize-winning geneticist Barbara McClintock noted, it's astounding that two brilliantly designed organisms share a single genome. To build a butterfly, you have to be able to assemble a network of elaborate substructures like wings, navigational systems, and a proboscis, and then integrate all these systems into a very complex organism. And you need a cause with an artist's eye for color and pattern and shape. A sense of beauty and aesthetics that extends way beyond utilitarian purposes like camouflage or species recognition. There may well be in butterflies aspects of beauty that are there not for the sake of reproduction or survival, but for us to appreciate.
A lot of people I know who study biology do it because they find it beautiful Natural selection has no reason to produce beauty. Beauty is a sign of the transcendent. It's purely gratuitous. We all recognize it. We just have to acknowledge what it points to.
As human beings, we have a unique gift that enables us to evaluate evidence and then arrive at logical conclusions. That's what science is all about. When you see certain effects in nature, it's your responsibility as an investigator to find the cause that will explain the effect. When you process all the evidence revealed through metamorphosis, and then you ask yourself, in your own experience, what kind of cause could bring about these results? I think the only reasonable answer is an intelligence that transcends the natural world. A designer with foresight and a sense of engineering and artistry, and the ability to light up the sky on a summer afternoon with magnificent evidence that life on Earth is the product of something greater than a blind, undirected process.
More than 70% of the Earth is covered by water. And in the oceans and rivers of our planet, nearly half of all its animal species live out the remarkable cycles of their existence. For each of these creatures, survival and reproduction hinge upon an elegant dance, where movements are precisely choreographed and performers superbly equipped to face daunting challenges. This is a realm where biological wonders reflect the highest levels of purpose and design, and extraordinary clues to the mystery of life shine like stars throughout a liquid universe. Albert Einstein once said that the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious, because mystery is the source of all true science. Today, after centuries of research and debate, science continues its quest to explain what is perhaps the greatest mystery in the universe: How do we account for the origin, diversity, and complexity of life on Earth?
You know, that's always been the big question, and I think there are two primary explanations. Two competing worldviews that have attracted the most attention and, frankly, generated the most controversy. The first we can call scientific materialism. This is the view that life is the result of physical interactions between matter, energy, and blind, undirected processes like natural selection. It's actually the foundation of Darwinian evolution. The second explanation is based on the view that every living organism is the product of purpose, plan, and a creative intelligence that exists outside the natural world. So science faces the challenge of trying to determine which one of these conflicting ideas is true. Now today I'd say that most biologists favor the view that all life originated in the ocean and then gradually evolved from simple to complex into corals and jellyfish and sharks and eventually human beings. But if you really study the animal kingdom and all of the incredible behaviors and biological engineering, I think there's a significant body of evidence that challenges the materialistic position. Evidence that points to realities like purpose, design, and imagination. And it isn't that hard to find. In fact, it's everywhere, just waiting to be discovered. So get in a boat, go to the beach, go out on the water, go beneath the water, you're going to see design.
Off Southern California, we have the greatest density of dolphins per square mile of anywhere on the planet. We have huge herds out here, up to 10,000 dolphins. It's like being in a herd of stampeding horses, and you're like right in the middle of it, and they're just... It's just beautiful, breathtaking, and when you see it, you never forget it.
Since 1994, Captain Dave Anderson has owned and operated one of the most successful dolphin and whale watching companies in the world. He has devoted thousands of hours to the study of dolphins off the coast of Dana Point in Southern California.
They will come right over to our boat to ride the pressure wave that's created by the boat moving through the water. We call it bow riding or boat surfing. And when they show up, it's like, hey, my friends are here, you know? And it's just a wonderful feeling. They are very efficient swimmers, and they can get up to speeds of close to 30 miles an hour. And they're such masters of their environment, perfectly suited for being in the ocean. I love to be able to share these animals with other people and see their reaction. I have seen grown men who have cried when they have seen the beauty of a dolphin swimming on the front of a boat. Everything is so choreographed and perfect, this synergy that goes on between the animal and the people.
A dolphin's grace and efficiency are the products of several factors, including a powerful tail that generates 5 times more forward thrust than an Olympic swimmer, a streamlined body ideal for cutting swiftly through the water, and glassy smooth skin that is shed and regenerated completely several times a day to remove barnacles and other organisms that could cause resistance at high speeds.
Dolphins live in pods, herds, or schools, and they have an amazing social network that allows them to really work together as a team. They live in these big pods partly for safety, Obviously, there's safety in numbers. They can keep an eye on each other that way. And also, it helps when they're feeding to have several animals so they can spread out when they're looking for the fish.
When a hydrophone cable is towed through the ocean, the dynamics of the pod are even more apparent.
I mean, we can hear that pod from miles away. And as the dolphins approach the hydrophone, the sounds get unbelievably loud. The clicks all sound like a Geiger counter, and then you'll hear, it almost sounds like a radio trying to tune in with all the whistles and the clicks going on. And the whistles are how the animals talk to one another, and so these dolphins are communicating to one another through their whistles, and then they've got the clicks, and the clicks are how they're finding their prey.
The animal's distinctive clicks are critical to its survival. For a dolphin's world is often one of limited visibility. An immediate recognition of food, allies, or enemies hinges upon sensory mechanisms other than vision.
You can't see very far underwater, but sound travels 4 times faster underwater than it does on land. So they're able to use sound to see.
Echolocation, or biosonar, is a complex biological system. Dolphins use it much like a submarine relies on sonar technology to navigate through environments where visibility is marginal or non-existent. In basic terms, a dolphin's echolocation works like this. The animal produces a series of low and high frequency sounds that are transmitted through its forehead. After these sonic waves hit an object, echoes bounce back. The greater the distance, the longer the delay in their return. When the dolphin receives the reflected signals, it forms a mental image of the target's location, size, and speed.
When they're chasing a fish, they'll go into a huge school of fish and they'll zero in on one fish. And they'll follow that single fish until they catch it. And if that fish jumps out of the water, they're right there jumping out of the water with it.
Echolocation requires several component parts, each designed for a specific function. When integrated, they form the most efficient sonar system on Earth, natural or man-made. Dolphins have no vocal cords, yet they produce a wide range of sounds. The process is pneumatically driven, controlled by the flow of air. Rising to the surface of the ocean, the dolphin exhales, then takes a quick breath. The instant the animal submerges, the blowhole shuts tightly as inhaled air rushes through the nasal passages on its way to the lungs. The engine that drives sound production is the larynx, a piston-like organ covered by muscles. It controls the flow of air through twin passages in the skull, each sealed by a retractable plug. When the larynx is pushed upward, the nasal plugs automatically open and air moves freely toward 2 sets of flaps called the phonic lips.
The phonic lips are the main sound generators, and they're designed to work individually or in unison. When the pressurized air hits the lips from below, they vibrate rapidly and produce bursts of the high and low frequency clicks at rates up to 2,000 clicks per second. It's an action that's been compared to the vibrating lips of a trumpet player blowing through the mouthpiece of his instrument.
Once air passes through the phonic lips, it is stored in pairs of inflatable sacs. When these sacs are full, they quickly deflate as muscles squeeze the air back down the system, past the open nasal plugs, and back into the lower cavities of the skull. Responding to the change in pressure, the larynx retracts, creating space for the recycled air. When the skull cavity refills, the larynx elevates to increase the air pressure. This triggers the nasal plugs to open, and a new cycle of clicks begins.
By recycling the inhaled air, the dolphin can delay having to surface for another breath. That way it can continue to echolocate for more than 10 minutes. This entire system operates with critical balances and regulation. Every component has to work perfectly within fractions of a second.
The efficiency of sound production is also evident in the transmission of clicks toward potential targets. The vibrations of the phonic lips are reflected off the air sacs and bones in the skull, then pass through the melon, an organ that fills most of the dolphin's forehead. The melon is highly flexible, and its shape is adjusted to fine-tune the transmission of sound through salt water. It is an acoustical lens, focusing sound waves into cone-shaped beams.
If something is far away, they focus their sound and make it more of a low-frequency sound because low-frequency sounds travel further. And when something is nearby, they use a higher frequency sound, and that gives them more detail.
The melon can concentrate acoustic energy by a factor of 4. When the beam hits a fish, it reflects, and the third phase of echolocation begins. The returning echoes are detected and channeled through the dolphin's teeth and lower jaw that function as antennae. This energy is amplified as it travels through large masses of tissue on the jawbone and onto mechanisms in the middle and inner ears. From the inner ear, signals are then transmitted through the auditory nerves to the brain, where they are analyzed in milliseconds. The dolphin interprets this data to produce a three-dimensional image of its target, complete with detailed information about its speed, texture, and shape. How well does echolocation work? In control tests, a dolphin can determine the difference between a golf ball and a ping pong ball based solely on the density of each object. And on the seafloor, it can find small fish buried 3 to 6 inches below the sand.
A dolphin can find a BB at the bottom of a swimming pool blindfolded. It can see inside of things. It's an amazing device, and if somebody had invented this and had it working as well as the dolphins, they'd make billions of dollars.
Think about echolocation from a problem-solving standpoint. What do you need? I've got to make the sound, number one. Number two, I've got to transmit it. I've got to get it out into the environment. All right, now I've got echoes coming back. Those have to be received, but that's not enough. I've got to process them. I've got to take that incoming information and turn it into something that I can actually use and understand. Making the sound, transmitting it, receiving it, and processing it are necessary elements of echolocation. And if you take away any one of them, let's say we take away transmission, it doesn't matter if you have the other three, you lose the system as a whole.
The challenge of building a complete system grows when the 4 phases of echolocation are broken down into their specific components. For to create the entire mechanism, each of the hundreds of individual parts required must be integrated and fully functional simultaneously.
So you've got all these different components for the sonar, and how does the dolphin know how to use this equipment? That's where instinct comes in. They not only got the hardware, but they got the owner's manual along with it. Instinct is a set of instructions on how to use the equipment, and it has to know that from the second it's born. All of this stuff happens automatically, and it's perfectly set up. It's like you look at it and you say, of course, that's the way it's supposed to work. So it's pretty hard to believe that this all happened by chance and natural selection, especially when each individual part is meaningless without the whole.
As a creative agent, natural selection is severely limited. By definition, the process uses random genetic mutations to slowly build or modify organisms through trial and error and small, gradual steps. Each incremental change is made blindly, without any sense of an ultimate purpose or objective.
What it cannot do is visualize a distant functional endpoint and say, well, I'll need this part, and I'll need this part, and I'll need this part. Any evolutionary process you consider, any materialistic process you can consider, has no foresight. It can't see 5 years, 5 seconds, 5 milliseconds into the future. For that, you need a mind. Only minds, only intellect, only a conscious, purposeful intelligence has the ability to say, that's my target, how can I hit it, what would I need to bring together to do that? That's what we do, that's what designers do, that's what minds and intellects do. Undirected physical processes can't do that. This is rational, it's reasonable. It's taking the evidence and saying, what's the best explanation for what I see?
Each of these hatchling sea turtles is smaller than the hand of a child, yet they are about to embark on a migration that will span decades and thousands of miles. It is a journey rich in evidence of purpose and design. After instinctively racing across the beach, the turtles will swim almost non-stop for the next 48 hours in an attempt to escape predatory birds, crabs, and fish that line the shore. But immediate survival is not their only objective. During these first 2 days, they will make critical preparations to spend the rest of their lives in the open sea.
Navigating in the open ocean is not easy at all. So from the moment a turtle hatches, there are elements imprinted in that turtle's head that tell it not only about things that it needs to learn, but places that it needs to go automatically. It's there. It's in the system.
Sea turtles migrate through the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, usually alone and without the benefit of significant visual landmarks. To navigate, they rely on a biological system calibrated to work in concert with an invisible shield that surrounds the Earth. Our planet is constantly bombarded by high-energy particles emitted from the sun. We are protected from this deadly barrage by a magnetic field that extends more than 40,000 miles into space. This phenomenon has been compared to an enormous bar magnet, with field lines that flow upward from the southern hemisphere and then wrap around the Earth. Each line intersects a different point on the Earth's surface at a specific angle and intensity. They are strongest at the poles and weakest at the equator. Together, they create a distinct pattern that can be charted as coordinates for the latitude and longitude of any location on the planet.
From the moment they hatch, we think that they may be imprinting on magnetic fields. They're able to detect both intensity as well as the angle of inclination for the potential to imprint on that particular nesting beach and a very specific latitude and longitude.
Once a turtle imprints the geomagnetic coordinates of its birthplace, it begins a journey that will lead to a feeding ground it will use throughout the rest of its life. For a turtle born in Costa Rica, for example, this home range could be a coral reef in the Dominican Republic more than 1,000 miles away. As a hatchling swims and drifts through the Caribbean, it continues to imprint a series of coordinates on a magnetic map inherited at birth and stored within its brain.
Once the turtles enter the water, they are detecting magnetic fields as they're drifting. So they're obviously picking up waypoints along their drifting existence over those first 2 years or so. And it's those waypoints that essentially they're going to use in a reverse manner when they leave the foraging grounds 15, 18, 25 years later to then make their way back essentially to the nesting beach.
The young turtle's development from hatchling into juvenile includes an increasing reliance on an array of internal compasses embedded in its head. Microscopic cells enriched with crystals of magnetite react to the Earth's magnetic field by aligning north.
It's a little tiny magnet. And typically what magnetite will do is it will align like the needle of a compass. It tells them what their heading is, and it tells them something about where they are at that moment.
So they need to be able to know what direction they're moving, but they also need to be able to know where they are at any point in that journey.
After a turtle reaches the feeding grounds, it will often stay for a decade or more while growing to maturity. Depending upon its species, an adult can weigh from 80 pounds to nearly a ton. And when it is ready to reproduce, the turtle sets its course for the beach where it was born. Throughout this return trip, it will again rely upon its internal compass and map. To find its way home, the turtle follows the coordinates it originally imprinted years earlier, but this time in reverse order. Then, when it nears land, it identifies the specific location of its natal beach with another navigational aid, its sense of smell.
Turtles may actually be detecting certain cues, that is chemicals in the water that may have come from the nesting beach, molecules of mud or sediments. They've had to lock that information up somewhere, but then when they turn around after 25 years to come back to the nesting beach, that's the point at which that information has to come back to the brain and say, okay, remember those scents, remember those molecules from 25 or 30 years ago, and now is the time to start thinking about and looking for those cues. And that may be another way for turtles as they get closer and closer to the nesting beach to recognize that they're in the right spot.
Every year, this scene plays out on tropical beaches throughout the world. One by one, adult females crawl out of the ocean to the shore, where they emerged as hatchlings. They will dig nests and each lay hundreds of eggs, then re-enter the sea to follow an imprinted map back to their feeding grounds on a migration cycle they will repeat dozens of times during the next half-century.
As a scientist, I love being able to ask questions about intricately designed systems and pursue those answers until we get to some kind of conclusion. This whole idea of migrating thousands of kilometers across open oceans. It's very difficult to imagine, but turtles are still nevertheless able to find their way back to sometimes within meters of where the nesting beach may have been.
Salmon certainly are an icon for the Pacific Northwest. When you look at what a salmon does, the incredible journey it takes, starting in a stream, going out into the ocean for 1,000 miles or more, all of the possibilities of it not returning, and then finding its way to the river mouth, traveling in some cases hundreds of miles up a river system, getting beaten up and bruised, just keep pushing on, enduring to find that one tributary where it's going to lay its eggs. It's truly incredible.
Fishery biologist Glenn Gately has devoted much of his career to the conservation of the Pacific salmon and the study of its life cycle. There are 5 different species of the fish, and for each, a new generation begins in the gravel beds of rivers and streams throughout the northwestern United States and Canada.
First of all, the female will dig a red, which is a depression in the gravel, deposit its eggs, fertilized by the male at the same time, and then the female moves upstream a little bit and digs another one, and the gravel from that covers the one downstream, and the female may do that 3 or 4 times. So the red is actually contains several pockets of eggs.
After hatching, the young salmon stay near their nests, but their native streams lack sufficient nutrients to sustain their development through adulthood.
For salmon to grow into the rather large fish that they end up being, they need more resources that are available in those little streams. So they migrate out into the oceans. They start exploiting all of the food resources that are available there to grow and develop so that they can come back and reproduce again in the freshwater rivers.
In preparation for their time at sea, these small freshwater fish must adapt their biology to survive in saltwater. Then enter an ocean they've never seen, travel thousands of miles, and find their way back to the location where they know they can spawn successfully. the gravel beds where they were born. Two sophisticated navigational systems are required for this migration. The first is based on the salmon's acute sense of smell and its ability to collect information about its environment as it heads downstream to the Pacific Ocean.
The fish, when it's a juvenile, is imprinting, first of all, on where it's rearing. And then, as it heads down the river toward the ocean, it's picking up cues in these different tributaries along the way. They're imprinting on the odors, the smells in the water, coming from the soil, the water percolating through the soil into the stream, the plants that are in the creek, all have distinct odors. And the odors are very specific. And all of this is being recorded in its memory bank. And as the fish move down the river with these constant signals going in and being processed and going all the way to the brain, a map is being formed.
As the salmon enter the Pacific, this chemical map is preserved and stored. Years later, it will be activated to ensure the survival of their species. During their time at sea, the fish form schools and grow rapidly as they feed on a bounty of marine life. Throughout this stage of their migration, they travel in huge counterclockwise arcs that can extend west, halfway to Japan. Then, when their reproductive systems are fully developed, they instinctively head back to the coast. This return to the exact location of their birth begins with a vital choice. After years in the ocean, each salmon must first identify the mouth of the correct river system that will eventually lead it home.
There's a lot of rivers that empty in along the Washington coast and the British Columbia coast, Oregon coast. Altogether, there must be hundreds of different river systems that it has to choose from.
It's absolutely essential for these salmon to find the right river, the river that they came out of when they were juveniles. Now, like turtles, they use magnetic navigation to get themselves back to the right spot. They have memorized what the magnetic coordinates are at the mouth of the stream that they came out of. And when it comes time to reproduce, they head back towards those magnetic coordinates.
Every September, millions of sockeye salmon congregate here, at the mouth of the Fraser River in Vancouver, British Columbia. 3 years earlier, they swam through these waters before entering the Pacific Ocean. Now they have returned to begin the final leg of their migration. A journey that will end with the new generation.
As the salmon approach the magnetic coordinates that tell them approximately where the river was that they came out of as juveniles, once they've gotten to that spot, they can start smelling the natal river, the river that they came from, and they start heading up that river based on chemical cues that they're picking up by smelling the water.
This chemical map will lead many of the sockeye more than 300 miles inland to the Adams River, a tributary of the Fraser and the place where they were born. Averaging almost 18 miles a day, they relentlessly move upstream. To reach the Adams, they will expend every reserve of strength, battling their way over rapids and rocks in the shallow stream beds. The sockeye are so focused on their objective that after leaving the ocean, they do not eat again. Driven by the instinct to spawn, they follow the trail of odor molecules that grows progressively stronger as they get closer to home.
Then it starts moving up the river, and it's like playing back what it had imprinted going down. It's pulling on that map, and then as it travels up the river, it's remembering, going by this tributary and that tributary, and it has to, no doubt, pass through other tributaries that just don't have the exact smell that it's looking for. But it's zeroing in, eventually, on that exact tributary where it was hatched out of the gravel, where it started its life.
The biological engineering required to interpret these chemical signals is stunning. The salmon constantly analyzes its route by testing the molecular composition of the water that enters its nostrils. In nasal cavities on both sides of the fish's head, flanges of tissue form olfactory organs. Each flange contains 500,000 tightly packed cells. Many of them support cilia that reach out into the water like antennae. And the cilia are embedded with odorant receptors, molecular machines that help identify specific chemicals in liquid.
The water contains odorant molecules, and what's going on is different streams are putting down different combinations of odorants. There's a lock and key kind of relationship between one kind of odorant and one kind of receptor.
Each type of odorant has a distinctive shape and composition. As they flow through the nasal cavity, they make contact with the cilia. If an odorant fails to match a receptor's precise criteria, it deflects. But if its structure is correct, the molecule fastens tightly into the binding site.
The shape has to be exactly right, and the charge distribution has to be exactly right, and then it fits in there like a glove. And that's when the signaling cascade begins.
These connections trigger electrical impulses that instantly flow down the nerve cells and out of the cavity. The signals are relayed through a maze of wires attached to the olfactory bulb, a biological switchboard that processes a torrent of information about the salmon's environment. Inside the bulb, hundreds of receivers interpret and organize this data, then send it on to other areas in the brain that will compare it to the chemical map compiled years earlier, when the juvenile sockeye first swam to the sea.
They can probably detect one odorant molecule on the order of parts per billion, maybe parts per trillion. Who really knows? What we do know is what they're looking at is the overall signal. And if the signal fits with the memory perfectly, then the fish knows this is the river, that's the one I'm going to swim up.
17 days after leaving the Pacific Ocean, the sockeyes reach Shuswap Lake and the confluence of the Adams River. Here they rest before making their final push to the gravel beds where they hatched 4 years earlier. From the air, an oscillating wall of salmon is visible along the shore. Thousands of fish have followed the same chemical trail to reach the inlets of this delta. Their odyssey is now hours from completion. In the amber glow of a Canadian autumn, the sockeyes disperse over 8 miles of shallow flowing water. It is an ideal place to build their nests, lay and fertilize their eggs, and ensure a new generation.
The system that salmon use as they head upstream seems almost impossibly accurate. Literally millions of them successfully make these journeys and successfully reproduce so that we see the whole cycle repeated over again. I'm awestruck by it.
Biologists have long marveled at the mysteries of animal migration. And in the process, they have discovered that navigational systems based on an acute sense of smell or the Earth's magnetic field are not limited to salmon and sea turtles. Comparable systems also appear in a variety of diverse organisms, including mammals, insects, and birds. Is it possible that natural selection can explain the origin of such elaborate biological mechanisms? Not once, but multiple times throughout the animal kingdom.
All of these different organisms have one kind of problem that they have to solve. They have to be able to navigate. And as long as you're constrained by that Darwinian view of reality, you have to explain it via that mutation selection kind of model. But how many times can we realistically expect random changes at the genetic level, coupled with unguided natural selection, to come up with the same solution? Darwinian natural selection is blind. It doesn't know that a solution has been arrived at in some other organism. It can't think, wow, the salmon have that elegant solution to the problem. Why don't we evolve towards that in the turtles? It's not an explanation that's possible. Now, conversely, it's not surprising at all to see an intelligent agent know of a solution to a problem and apply that same solution under different circumstances over and over and over again. This is what we see intelligence do, and it's not what we would expect from an unguided process.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. MDIS, we have ignition, we have a liftoff.
On September 5, 1977, the Voyager 1 spacecraft embarked on a mission to explore the outer regions of our solar system and interstellar space. Voyager was equipped with an array of scientific instruments and a message from Earth to the rest of the universe. A gold-plated disc imprinted with images and audio recordings that illustrated the diversity of life and culture on our planet.
As the Secretary General of the United Nations, I send greetings on behalf of the people.
These cosmic postcards included 116 pictures, greetings in 55 languages, and a medley of iconic music and sounds. Among them was a haunting refrain from the depths of the sea. The songs of the humpback whale.
I think the decision to include these songs on a mission into outer space reflected just how popular they were here on Earth. In fact, in 1971, an album was released by Capitol Records. It sold millions of copies, and the Whales became rock stars, and they fascinated science and the general public ever since.
These songs are loud, long, and among the most complex vocalizations in the animal kingdom. Only male humpbacks sing like this, and always with their mouths shut tightly, so technically, they're humming. Songs can last from 3 minutes to more than half an hour, and are repeated, almost verbatim, in sessions that often continue for days. If one whale introduces a variation on a theme, it is copied by other whales in the vicinity. Songs can travel and be heard 1,000 miles from their source.
The structure of the songs can change dramatically from year to year. Humpback populations in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Caribbean each compose new arrangements that are unique to their specific locations. And typically a song has 4 to 12 different themes.
After more than 4 decades of research, exactly why the whales sing is still not clear. Scientists have long speculated that the songs are mating calls used during courtship, or possibly as a form of sonar to help identify and track the location of nearby whales. But while these enigmatic solos remain a mystery, other features of the humpback's behavior and anatomy are much better understood. The humpback whale is one of the largest animals on Earth. Adult females measure up to 50 feet and weigh 40 to 50 tons. They can live for more than a century. In warm tropical waters, a female gives birth to a single calf every 2 to 3 years. The whales breathe through twin blowholes that expel a double stream of spray visible for miles. Then they quickly inhale enough air to fill a pair of lungs, each the size of a small car. When it dives, a humpback can hold its breath for up to 45 minutes. Their underside is lined with grooves that run from navel to chin. This accordion design allows the humpback to expand its throat as it intakes huge quantities of water whenever it feeds. The whales have no teeth. Instead, they are filter feeders, straining 50 pounds of krill or small fish with every mouthful. Humpbacks have massive flippers, the largest of any animal. The whales raise them to work as solar collectors, a behavior that helps regulate their core body temperature. Their powerful tails are legendary. The flukes measure up to 15 feet across and can propel the whales to depths exceeding 700 feet.
You can say majestic, you can say breathtaking, any number of adjectives, but really in the end the language fails. You have to be there standing on the boat looking at them. They're as long as a city bus, You know, they've been down underwater feeding, up they come. How do you describe that?
This sense of sheer wonder is universal, and our fascination with the largest creatures in the Earth's history has sparked a rigorous search for the explanation of their origin. It is a search that is both an icon of Darwinian evolution and a challenge to its validity.
You look at its features, it's warm-blooded, it has mammary glands, it's clearly a mammal. Yet, its whole life is in the water, so there's a puzzle for evolution. How did this come to be?
The Darwinian narrative of whale evolution is familiar. A four-legged terrestrial mammal, the size of a wolf or sheep, undergoes a series of gradual biological changes over millions of years.
The standard textbook account I take to be artistic license. When you look at the problem of being a land mammal that finds itself, speaking loosely, in an aquatic environment, and you've got to conduct your everything there, including reproduction, you have to have the coming together of a number of adaptations. And that is unfathomably complicated.
The scale of these adaptations would have to be massive, including a remodel of the skull and muscles to move the nostrils to the top of the head, the conversion of front legs into flippers, a reconstruction of the skeleton, including a ball joint that allowed the tail to move up and down, the transformation of a few dozen teeth into hundreds of plates lined with brush-like fibers, the reorganization of kidney tissues to accommodate the intake of salt water, lungs dramatically enlarged and renovated to withstand the intense pressure of deep dives, the inclusion of a blubber layer for insulation in cold water, and modifications of ears, eyes, and skin to work effectively in an aquatic environment.
Just think of all the parameters that would have to be modified, and then multiply that by, I don't know, 1,000-fold, or more than that. That's the scale of the problem that you're dealing with.
In the context of Darwinian evolution, the most crucial adaptations would involve the male reproductive system. To optimize the whale's mobility in water, its reproductive organs would have to move from the exterior of the animal's torso to inside its abdominal cavity. But to produce sperm, the internalized testes must be cooled and kept below core body temperature.
Unless it's kept below, you'd have no sperm production, period. And in evolutionary terms, sterility means it's a no-go. You don't count in the race of life, so to speak.
One of the necessary conditions of natural selection is the ability to reproduce. You can't have natural selection if you don't have reproductive capability. You can't make the sperm, you can't have reproduction, you can't get natural selection operating. So you've got to solve this engineering problem.
As a male humpback swims, it generates heat, raising its body temperature. To prevent sterility, the whale relies on a refrigeration mechanism designed into its circulatory system. In the non-insulated regions of the dorsal fin and tail, blood is cooled and then transported through a network of veins to the whale's abdomen. Here, beneath a layer of muscles, a web of veins and arteries surround the testes. They are arranged so blood flows in alternate directions, and heat from the warm arteries radiates to the cooler veins. This transfer lowers the temperature of the blood to a safe level before it is channeled to the reproductive organs.
It's a remarkable solution to that problem. It's beautiful. It's anatomically complex. It involves what is called, borrowing from the Latin, a miraculous web of arteries and veins. But can you explain it by some smooth, gradualistic, textbook scenario, little change, fixation? No, it doesn't fit the Darwinian model. In my opinion, you're looking at just a suite of characters that had to have been integrated from the get-go. I mean, it's a non-gradualistic type of change. So the cooling system makes sense because you have internalized reproductive glands. The internalized reproductive glands, however, are a no-go unless you've got the cooling system. You can't explain the emergence of one without the other.
Since 2001, biologist Richard Sternberg has used widely accepted data on mutation rates and population genetics to study the Darwinian model for whale evolution. Sternberg has focused his research on natural selection and the probability of coordinated mutations, the genetic errors in a DNA molecule required for macroevolutionary change.
I mean, I say it's a numbers game. You have to explain it in terms of a number of coincident mutations that just happened to arise and be put into the right combinations to reshape the vertebral column, to reshape the musculature, the nervous system, the eyes, the ears, and on and on and on.
So let's imagine that the transformation you wish to achieve is transforming a leg from a terrestrial mammal into the flipper of a fully aquatic mammal like a dolphin or a whale. Now, we look at our set of mutations that are required. Let's say we've got A that's going to affect the bones. But you think about your own limb, it's not just bones. There are muscles and tendons and nerves and associated behaviors. So you look down your list of mutations and you go, well, I've got A starting my transformation, but I need B, C, D, E, and F as well. So the challenge of cooperative mutations is to have these events occur in space and time in such a way that they can jointly work together, cooperate, to bring about the transformation that you need. But you know what? Those mutations, they're accidents in the genetic material. They just happen. So you're essentially relying on luck. And odds are you're going to miss the target by a mile.
In 2008, researchers at Cornell University calculated the time required to generate randomly a single pair of cooperative mutations in a population of large mammals. Richard Sternberg applied these calculations to his ongoing analysis.
And they came to the conclusion that, sure, you can get these two coordinated mutations, but it is a problem. It's a problem because you need, as far as we know, on the order of well over 100 million years to give you the coordinated mutations that would, just two, that would give you some beneficial modification. And by my reckoning, to account for the transformation that you'd see, you need far more than two mutations.
If two cooperative mutations are established in a population of mammals only once in a million centuries, then a significant challenge to the Darwinian model rises from the dust of the earth. According to the most generous interpretations of the fossil record, the longest possible time frame for the theorized evolution of a land-dwelling animal into a whale is 9 million years. That's a fraction of the 100 million years required to produce a single pair of cooperative mutations, and just one of the countless anatomical changes necessary for natural selection to succeed.
So when you just plug in the math, and there are various ways, I mean, what you've done is you've exceeded the time that the geological record provides you with. And then you start saying, okay, now I'm going to rely on these coordinated changes, and it's kind of game over.
You don't have to have a PhD in mathematics or population genetics to see where this is heading. Even if I grant you millions and millions of years, 5, 10, 50, 100 million years to bring about this transformation, you still face these very real limits of population size, mutation rate, generation time, and the number of features that have to be modified. If the process in question is not going to happen, it's not going to happen, and it really doesn't matter how much time you have. So have all the time you want. If this transition occurred, it did not occur by an undirected Darwinian process. That simply is not possible biologically.
Darwinism provided an explanation for the appearance of design and argued that there is no designer, or, if you will, the designer's natural selection. If that's out of the way, if that just does not explain the evidence, then the flip side of that is, well, things appear designed because they are designed. And those designs simply seem too efficient and too optimum to have been cobbled together by some haphazard mechanism.
Snorkeling with my daughters off the coast of Mexico a few years ago, we saw all these tropical fish coming by. And it's just over-the-top, gratuitous, exuberant beauty. This enormous canvas of incredible marine life. And it draws me to design. Why? What triggers the inference of design? What triggers that conclusion? What triggers it is the evidence of planning, is evidence of foresight, is evidence of a global architecture that only a mind can bring about. The data from genetics and molecular biology and a host of other fields have proven impossible to reconcile with undirected material causes. And if science is an open-ended search for the truth, regardless of where the evidence leads, then what difference should it make if it leads to an intelligent cause? I want to understand the world. I want knowledge. I want to know what's true about the world, and the assumption that living things are not random assemblages, but that there's a rational logic underlying them, that assumption is enormously fruitful for yielding knowledge. And if it's knowledge that you want, that's the direction you should go. All you need is an open heart, open eyes, and an open mind. And that signal of design that's there in nature will be clear to you. Unmistakably, it's everywhere.
Among the most striking characteristics of our planet is the diversity of its animal life. From microscopic organisms to elephants and blue whales, the menagerie of creatures that inhabit the earth is truly remarkable. To date, more than 1 million different animal species have been identified by science. 5 times that number may still await discovery, and each is unique from any other. But the scope of this variety is only partially defined by color, behavior, and size. For often, concealed beneath feathers and skin, elegant systems of muscle, bone, and chemical machines orchestrate complex tasks essential to survival. Join us as we explore some of the extraordinary biological mechanisms that make life possible. Ingenious networks of component parts that empower and regulate movement, navigation, growth, and countless other everyday miracles. Each a compelling display of evidence for design and purpose in the living world.
It never ceases to amaze me that birds live in the air. Their environment is this invisible fluid that surrounds us, the atmosphere. If you don't take that for granted, the question that should naturally occur to you is, how do they fly? When I was growing up, my father worked as an aeronautical engineer. And one of the principles that he taught me that I've really never forgotten is, if something works, it's not happening by accident. Successfully flying, I mean really flying, controlled flight, it's going to have to be coordinated, carefully engineered. I imagine human beings sitting and watching birds for millennia, yearning to be able to do what the birds do. And finally, in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, we figured out how to do it for ourselves with the aid of a machine.
As long as human beings have walked the earth, their eyes and hearts have turned to the skies. Our fascination with flight and the desire to experience it have inspired a myriad of inventions that can lift us, at least momentarily, into the avian world. But for all of the creative brilliance their construction requires, a mechanically powered aircraft of any design pales when compared to a gull on the wing. For a bird is the ultimate flying machine, and to see one glide in the wind is to observe what the poet William Blake once called a portion of genius. More than 9,000 species of birds have been identified in the world, and nearly all of them can fly. They thrive in every environment, each equipped to endure specific challenges of climate and geography, and each the result of a biological process executed to perfection within an amazing vessel. Ranging in weight from less than an ounce to more than 3 pounds. A fertilized egg is a package of life. A factory where the mechanisms that will carry out every facet of a bird's existence are meticulously crafted in a matter of weeks. Depending upon its species, a female can lay as many as 20 eggs in a season. Then she will devote herself to their care throughout an incubation period that usually lasts between 2 and 7 weeks. Since Aristotle, scientists have studied the eggs of a chicken to unlock the mysteries of a bird's development from a single cell.
Remember that all birds develop in the same way. So if I'm looking at a superb flying bird, let's say a swift or a swallow or something like that, it's going to develop in about the same way as a chicken embryo develops. And every mechanism that is necessary for flight, every adaptation for flight that you find in doves, that you find in eagles, vultures, they're all there in a chicken.
The developmental process begins soon after fertilization and accelerates once the egg is laid, as thousands of cells rapidly multiply and organize inside the protective shell.
In the early hours, you see the foundation for this organism that's coming later on being laid down. You see the front and the back and the top and the bottom and all of those things being worked out in this cascade of events.
Where's the head going to be? Where's the tail going to be? What's right, what's left, what's front versus back? Already, these major axes are being established. And as these cells are moving and heading towards the places in the embryo where they're going to develop, they're also changing what they're going to do eventually. They're committing themselves, in most cases, irreversibly to particular functional roles.
On day 2, the bird's spinal cord, ears, and eyes take shape. Its vascular and circulatory systems are established, and its heart beats for the first time. At hour 46, the head of the embryo starts to arch into the fetal position. Throughout the second day, a network of blood vessels branches from the embryo into the yolk. They will transport vital nutrients back to the growing organism.
You gotta pay attention to the details. You have genes being switched on and off, interaction, cell communication. It's an elaborate dance. It's like a ballet taking place on a stage with thousands of cast members. All of them doing everything they're supposed to on cue, in the right order, in the right sequence, in the right time. The process itself is so amazing. It transcends anything we know.
With the groundwork of major systems and organs now in place, the next 19 days are devoted to the completion of their development.
So you've gone from that one cell that can become anything, and 21 days, billions of different cells doing hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of tasks in the organism, the speed, the efficiency, the elegance of the whole process. What you're seeing is a mechanism at work, information being translated into a physical product at each step along the way. Machines doing jobs. It's absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Baby face, You've got the cutest little baby face. There's not another one would take your place. Oh, baby face.
Every bird born into the world starts life preoccupied with the same obsessions: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Weak and often blind for several days, most nestlings are totally reliant upon their parents for food. And they quickly learn to associate the vibrations made by an adult landing near the nest with the arrival of their next meal. As the young birds grow, their muscles strengthen. Primary feathers fill out and align, and functional wings take shape. All in preparation for the endeavor that will define the rest of their lives: flight.
The parents aren't going to feed them forever. In fact, that's one of the encouragements that parents will give baby birds to fly. They'll move a distance away from them, not give them their food in the nest, so they have to come out. And you'll see baby birds working their way up to this. They'll be standing on the edge of the nest and just getting the feel for what those wings can do for them.
Oceanic birds on remote islands, they'll spend days watching their parents before ever attempting that first flight. And we have to assume they're fast learners. Here's this feathered downy chick that gets bigger and bigger, and some adult feathers start coming through the down. But finally he has his wings, so he spends all day taking periodic flaps of his wings on the ground to build up his wing muscles. And then comes the big day when mother or father says, "It's time to go," and they nudge him towards the cliff. And he jumps off the cliff, and to his great surprise, if he puts out his wings like his parents did, he can fly, he can soar.
They have to have the instincts necessary to be able to do this. And presumably, instinct is rooted somewhere in the genetics of the organism. And once they do launch out, giving them at least a basic kind of idea of how to move their wings, how to move their tail, how to orient themselves in 3 dimensions so that they can actually pull this off. And somehow or other, birds that fly have that hardwired into them.
If you think about flight as a behavior, it's really an all or nothing proposition. You don't partly fly, because flight requires not just having a pair of wings, but having your entire biology coordinated towards that function.
Avian flight hinges on a critical balance of aerodynamic design, physical strength, and minimal weight. And every part of a bird's anatomy helps fulfill these criteria.
This is a remarkable balance that the bird has to maintain between structural strength of the bone and the needs for flight.
In order to fly, a bird must be strong enough to free its body from the bonds of gravity and light enough to remain suspended in the air. Its skeletal system is crucial to success. This adult pelican weighs more than 20 pounds and has the strength to fly hundreds of miles before landing. Yet its entire skeleton weighs less than 30 ounces. How? The majority of the bird's bones are hollow and reinforced by an internal network of girders and struts. The result is a light but durable framework, able to withstand the constant stress of flapping, takeoffs, and landings.
Feathers do a lot of different things really, really well, and they're very specialized in the way they're designed.
Birds are covered by several types of feathers. Closest to the skin, a soft, thick coat of down provides excellent insulation. And the down is encased by multiple layers of contour and primary feathers. These outer layers give a bird its streamlined shape, protection from moisture, and the ability to maneuver freely in the air. To do so, they must be light, strong, and extremely flexible. When a Canadian goose approaches a pond, the long primary feathers on its wingtips bend and twist open like a Venetian blind. Simultaneously, the alula, 3 feathers attached to a small bone, is raised to create a slot that alters the path of turbulent air rushing over the wing. The precise actions of these mechanisms prevent stalling while slowing the bird's descent for a controlled, soft landing.
You're going to need specialized muscles to move those wings, so your pectoral muscles in particular are going to be very large.
Hundreds of muscles, tendons, and ligaments power a diverse range of wing movements. The centerpieces of this system are the flight muscles. Pectoralis major, and beneath it, supracoracoideus. Together, they form the engines of avian flight. When the pectoral muscles contract, they pull the humerus bone in each wing down, creating thrust and lift. In immediate response, the supracoracoideus, connected by a tendon to the top of the humerus, works like a pulley to lift the wing every time the muscle contracts.
This is another terrific design because this pulley system eliminates the need for a large, heavy muscle above the shoulder to lift the wing back up. Instead, the flight muscles are all below the wings, where they help create a compact center of gravity that really stabilizes the bird's body in the air.
Everything on a bird is integrated together so that flight is possible. Everything that possibly can be reduced in weight is reduced. Everything that can be moved towards the center of mass is moved. All of these engineering compromises, all of these refinements, it's multiple systems working together perfectly in a coordinated way all at once. And when you put that puzzle together and the pieces fit in exactly the right way, then boom, you have the magic, and the birds can fly.
In November 2011, Time magazine honored a miniature aircraft as one of the best inventions of the year. Designed to mimic a hummingbird in flight, the Nano Air Vehicle, or NAV, was developed by a team of engineers in Southern California. This prototype of an experimental surveillance drone is equipped with a video camera and can hover, rotate, and fly in any direction.
It's a sensational piece of engineering. Really incredible work, especially when you consider that all the parts are encased in a package that weighs about the same as a AA battery. But in terms of its complexity and abilities, the NAV is still light years behind the bird that inspired its creation.
Hummingbirds have to be among the most fascinating birds I've ever encountered. Kind of made a lifetime avocation of studying them and filming them and getting to know them. There are 343 recognized species today, and all of them are found in North America, Central and South America.
Vibrant, beautiful, and wonderfully unique. Hummingbirds are among the most breathtaking creatures on the planet. Often described as nature's helicopters, their acrobatic displays, powered by wings that can beat more than 100 times a second, are unparalleled in the avian world.
Hummingbirds are built for speed and maneuverability. Zipping around, incredible aerobatics, going backwards, forward, hovering in midair. The tail is a balancing organ. It helps guide which direction they want to go. They can raise it to zoom up. They can drop it to stall. They can use it to go side to side. It's highly maneuverable. The flight muscle in a typical hummingbird represents about 43% of the body mass. That gives them a tremendous power to do these kinds of maneuvers that most birds cannot even dream of accomplishing.
Hummingbirds routinely employ 3 specialized types of flight. To fly forward, the wings flap rapidly up and down, generating thrust. Then to hover, their angle and movement are radically adjusted to create a figure-8 pattern that stabilizes the bird's body in the air as it feeds. And to fly backward, the wings move in a circular path above the bird's head.
No other bird can fly like this because no other bird has a skeletal system designed to function like a hummingbird's. And this becomes obvious when you compare a hummer to a large bird like a raptor.
For a red-tailed hawk and virtually every other species of bird, the mechanics of powered flight are similar. Its wings flap up and down, like paddles on hinges, creating lift only on the downstroke. In contrast, while hovering, a hummingbird flaps its wings backward and forward to generate lift on both strokes.
Hummingbirds need to hover in a fixed position, meaning that they need lift all the time, and their shoulder joint provides a unique solution to the problem. It can rotate a wing 140 degrees by twisting the upper arm bone. And when the bone twists, the entire wing inverts as it's coming back up, actually to generate part of the lift that they require to maintain their stability in the air.
The hummingbird's rigorous lifestyle is also sustained by its muscular, metabolic, and circulatory systems.
To keep this massive flight muscle filled with oxygen-carrying blood, the bird's heart has to beat as much as 1,250 beats a minute. Just think of the speed of the nerve synapses. I mean, all of this is being controlled by nerves, firing at an incredible rate to make this possible.
The hummingbird is fueled for flight by consuming more than twice its body weight in nutrients each day. So during its waking hours, the bird eats every 10 to 15 minutes. It has been estimated that to survive, an adult human being with comparable metabolism would require 150 pounds of food every 24 hours. The engineering demonstrated in the bird's anatomy is again ingenious.
The hummingbird's tongue is about twice as long as its beak, so it can reach deep into a flower. And until recently, many scientists believed that the birds relied heavily on capillary action to draw the nectar through their tongues and into their mouths. Kind of like water spontaneously rising up a thin straw in a glass. But some fascinating discoveries at the University of Connecticut have shown that the mechanisms involved are much more dynamic than anyone realized.
The hummingbird's tongue is actually a nectar trap equipped with a pair of narrow tubes that taper sharply. The tip of each tube is segmented into a row of flaps that are attached to a supporting rod. When the bird isn't eating, these flaps form two rows of closed loops that fit compactly into the beak. But when the hummingbird feeds, its tongue undergoes a dramatic transformation. Inside the flower, the tongue extends to make contact with the nectar. When immersed in fluid, the tip splits and the flaps on each fork systematically unfurl. Then, as the tongue is withdrawn, the flaps close tightly to seal and capture the nectar for delivery into the bird's mouth. This entire process is executed automatically in less than a 20th of a second, thousands of times a day.
From flower to flower to flower to flower, this brilliant iridescent body, there's a kind of jewel-like quality that they have. This exquisite workmanship, the colors and the sound that they make. I think in some respects, the wonder of a hummingbird almost transcends language. And we respond to what we see at a level really, you could say, deeper than rationality. I mean, it's not irrational, but it's almost like responding to the work of an artist. And at that level, we respond with our soul, with our emotions. What can you say? Words can't do it justice, so you just stand there and applaud.
The avian world is a tapestry of both the mysterious and the unexpected. A showcase of behaviors that can surprise, inspire, and fill a human heart with wonder. On a January morning in southern England, flocks of European starlings depart from the heath where they had roosted throughout the previous night. In an explosion of motion and sound, the birds disperse to the surrounding countryside where they will feed throughout the day. 12 hours later, each will return to take part in one of nature's most spectacular displays.
Scientists photographed portions of a flock from two angles, Then they used the data to identify the locations of individual birds. They were able to plot the positions of more than 1,300 starlings within a murmuration and create 3D models to reconstruct their movements. The research appears to indicate that an individual starling cannot monitor the entire flock. Instead, they're estimating the distance between themselves and the nearest birds in their immediate vicinity, those to their left, right, and especially in front of them.
Each starling monitors only the positions of the 6 or 7 closest birds and appears to follow one simple rule. When your neighbor moves, so do you. As a result, the slightest change of direction by one starling can trigger a chain reaction that ripples throughout the entire flock, creating constant variation within these immense formations.
It's a little like fighter pilots flying in tight formations, where they can be as close, wingtip to wingtip, as 18 inches. They're using a property called topological distance, where the individual pilots aren't actually monitoring the whole formation. Instead, they're watching their nearest neighbour and responding to every movement that he makes in the air.
The aerial maneuvers of 200,000 starlings are even more demanding. The birds must each sense and react to the oscillations of the flock in less than 100 milliseconds, about 3 times faster than the blink of an eye. And their instinctive decisions are flawless. It is a ballet, the choreography of which we are only beginning to understand.
Such common birds and such extraordinary behaviour. We've learned a lot about starlings, but there are huge questions we're still not even close to answering. These murmurations, they're 3-dimensional. The flock moves in several directions at once, but there doesn't seem to be a specific leader. So, who decides whether to turn left or right, or to form a giant sphere or a jumping line in the sky? Who sends a message that it's time to dive back into the reeds for the night? And how is it transmitted to 100,000 birds in an instant? Maybe we'll never have all the answers, and that's all right with me, because every time I come here on a winter evening, I still get the chills, and I'll still be amazed, and I'll walk home thinking, how wonderful is that?
They have been called the birds of the sun, for they spend more than 8 months a year in the perpetual daylight of the polar summers. Late May to early August in the Arctic region, from Alaska to northern Europe and Asia. Then November until April in Antarctica and the Weddell Sea. In the process, They will travel from pole to pole during the longest migration of any animal on Earth. They are Sterna paradisea, the Arctic terns.
A lot of birds migrate, but by almost any account, the Arctic tern has to be near or at the top of the list for incredible achievement.
The more I learn about Arctic terns, the more I feel like I want to build a shrine to them in sheer admiration. Going from one end of the planet to the other, spending most of their life in the air, just never ceases to amaze me.
The Arctic tern's epic migration is a quest for both food and a safe haven to raise their young. The location of their primary nesting grounds in the north and feeding areas in the south were identified in the 1960s. But the birds were impossible to track over the open sea, so detailed knowledge of the actual route of their migration was almost non-existent. Many researchers speculated that terns breeding in the North Atlantic followed the coastlines of Europe and Africa as they traveled both north and south on a round trip of approximately 24,000 miles. Yet there was little evidence to confirm this theory. For Karsten Eggevang of the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources, the challenge to accurately map the tern's migration inspired pioneering research and groundbreaking discovery.
Since I was little, being a bird watcher, I knew about the Arctic tern. We know since the 1960s that the Arctic terns probably do this long migration, but it's never been able to prove it or to get details about it. For me, it's like a mystery that hasn't been solved yet.
In 2007, Eggevang led an expedition to Sand Island, a desolate patch of land off the northeast coast of Greenland. Here, 1,000 pairs of Arctic terns arrived each June to feed, mate, and lay their eggs. The key to Eggevang's research were geolocators, logging devices designed to measure and record levels of ambient sunlight and geographic positions anywhere along the tern's route. At 1.4 grams, each was small enough to attach to the bird's leg, but minimal weight came with a cost. Since the loggers lacked the components to transmit their data in real time, they would have to be recovered the following year.
So one summer you will equip the bird with this logger, you will let the bird go, and then you'll come back the next year and you have to locate that exact same individual in order to catch it once more and download the data.
Over 4 weeks, 50 terns were banded and released. Eggevang then returned to Denmark, while the birds headed south to Antarctica and a summer of feeding in the Weddell Sea.
And then we waited a year back in Denmark, just speculating how many birds would actually come back the following year. We really didn't know what to expect in terms of how many loggers, how high a percentage we would actually get back, or if we were able to find the birds at all.
In July 2008, Eggevang returned to Sand Island and began the seemingly impossible task of retrieving the loggers.
Well, it was certainly very time-consuming to find the bird the following year. We have to find the bird in the air and then follow the bird to a nest. The only way to go about it is just to spend a lot of time and stare up at the air on hundreds of Arctic tern at the same time. And we were looking for a small ring with a small logger on the ring, so it was very hard to see the actual logger in the air. So once we discovered the logger on the leg of the bird, we will keep our eyes focused on the bird and sort of follow it down on the ground, and it would reveal its nest place for us, and then we were able to set the trap to catch the bird.
Remarkably, after nearly a year and thousands of miles at sea, 10 of the loggers were recovered. But despite the success, Egevang's optimism was guarded. His isolated camp lacked the electricity to download the data, so confirmation that the equipment had worked would have to wait until his return to Denmark.
So I waited 1 month until I get back to my office before downloading the data. It took a few minutes before data started to get into my computer, so there was certainly some very, very exciting minutes before I found out that 9 out of the 10 loggers we used actually had a full year of data, so that was very, very exciting. We had these completely unknown features of the Arctic tern migration that we were able to discover, so yeah, I'm really, really pleased with the results.
In January 2010, Carsten Egevang published his findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. His work drew international attention and cast new light on the world's longest migration. Egevang's first discovery was a biological hotspot in the middle of the North Atlantic. After leaving Greenland, the birds stopped to feast for nearly a month in deep waters rich with marine life, an ideal location to build fuel reserves for the rest of the trip.
We could see that the Arctic terns will pause their migration in an area that was rather rich in productivity. It was unknown that there was such an important place for the seabirds.
From the North Atlantic, the terns headed southeast toward the coast of Africa. When they neared the equator, they surprised Egevang again by splitting their path. Half of the birds continued along the African coast, while the others turned west toward Brazil. Though now separated by thousands of miles, the birds remained focused on their ultimate destination. And by November, they arrived in Antarctica as temperatures warmed in the southern hemisphere.
Once a bird is down at Antarctica, you have a bloom of the plankton, which will follow by really, really large quantities of small fish.
In early April, the terns, now rested and refueled, sensed the approach of winter. And within days, the entire population was moving north. Egevang discovered that to take advantage of prevailing global winds, the birds traced an enormous S-shaped path from the Weddell Sea to Greenland, the most energy-efficient route from pole to pole. Flying almost non-stop for 2 months, they traveled up to 300 miles a day and arrived together at Sand Island during the first week of June. The timing of their return was critical, for the window available to mate, lay their eggs, and raise their chicks is only about 8 weeks. By mid-August, another Arctic winter was at hand. And once more, these birds of the sun instinctively headed south. Along the way, they would again endure the challenges of distance, weather, and navigation. To complete a migration, some Arctic terns will undertake 30 times during the course of their lives.
But it's pretty impressive, isn't it? I mean, being able to find their way so far away and then get back to exactly the same spot where they spent the summer last year and start their breeding. The annual round trip of the Arctic tern is, say, in the neighborhood of 70,000 kilometers. And if you extrapolate that throughout their lifespan, you reach in the neighborhood of 2.4 million kilometers. That's actually the same distance as if the Arctic terns were to travel to the moon and back again 3 times during their lifetime. It is really amazing.
Whatever its species, a bird in flight is a consummate blend of beauty and functional design. For each is a living work of art that embodies the highest levels of engineering. And today, as in centuries past, their origin still inspires a search for explanation.
There's a term in the philosophy of science that was widely used in the early 19th century, and that term is vera causa, true cause. What is the true cause of something? Now, in the case of the origin of flight, we have a complex function with all the associated anatomy and behavior and so forth. And the question we really should be asking is, what is the cause that is sufficient to bring this about? What is the vera causa of avian flight?
Since the late 19th century, nearly all research has been limited to natural processes, most notably Darwinian evolution. This view of biology has given rise to several theories for the origin of flying birds. Many scientists now argue that small dinosaurs gradually evolved feathers, wings, and powered flight over millions of years, as they ran and jumped to flee predators, leaped from limb to limb in trees, or flapped feather-covered arms to catch flying insects. Each of these theories is highly controversial, and each contends that the true cause of flight is grounded in scientific materialism and the belief that matter and energy are all that exist in the universe.
From a materialist standpoint, you need some causal story, some account of how this unique function came to be. And, this is the critical point, you can't invoke a designer. No intelligence involved. Mind is excluded as a causal possibility. This assumption was captured eloquently by the Nobel laureate Francis Crick when he said, "Biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved."
It's so hard not to use language that suggests a purpose in biology, because everywhere we look we see purpose and we see design. And yet we're told over and over, it just looks like it's full of purpose. It just looks like it's designed for a function.
There's a reason why a rule like that has to be imposed, because if it isn't, you're going to see that it's designed. That's what our brains logically tell us.
Intuitively, the appearance of design in nature is unmistakable, and opportunities to test its validity are woven throughout the network of biological systems that make avian flight possible. A prime example is a feather.
A bird's feathers are arranged to create a strong, highly efficient airfoil that produces lift as air moves rapidly over the curved top of the wing and slower beneath it. And as a consequence of that, there's a pressure differential. There's more pressure pushing up on the bottom of the wing than there is on top of the wing. So in a sense, a bird's actually sucked up into the air.
As a bird glides or flaps, a network of muscles, ligaments, and bones constantly adjusts the position of its feathers to achieve the highest maneuverability. The inherent precision of this system is even more evident when the structure of a single feather is magnified.
One feather can contain 1 million individual parts, and its overall structure is supported by a hollow shaft that runs up the center. Then, branching out diagonally from the shaft, Hundreds of strands called barbs give a feather its flexibility and aerodynamic shape. And when you move in closer, you see that each barb supports hundreds of even smaller structures called barbules.
Barbules are arranged into sets of opposing pairs. Those extending from one side of a barb support a cluster of microscopic hooks, and those on the other side are curled into ridges. As they overlap, the barbules interlock, hook to ridge, to create a zipper-like mechanism, and on a larger scale, a herringbone pattern that blocks the passage of air, bends freely, and allows a bird to easily repair breaks on the surface of its wings.
Unless those individual components that you see in feathers work together appropriately, you're simply not going to have a functional feather. And we need to remember that the feathers are just a small part of this overarching combination of systems that allow birds to fly.
The physical demands on a flying bird are severe, and dozens of biological systems are designed to meet every challenge. The enormous quantities of energy and strength a bird requires are produced by hearts that beat more than 500 times a minute. Massive breast muscles that relentlessly power their wings. The most efficient respiratory systems in the animal kingdom. And digestive systems designed to fuel high metabolisms without taxing the stringent weight requirements of flight. Birds also depend upon navigational systems that can track the sun, constellations, and the Earth's magnetic field. An internal gyroscope to stabilize the orientation of their bodies during rapid movements in the air. Acute vision to identify food from half a mile above the Earth. And a battery of instincts that cue and direct migration journeys across oceans and continents.
Obviously, you're coordinating many different systems that have to be all exactly right for the bird to fly. And the more systems and component parts that are involved, the more challenging it is to explain how all of them came together so precisely in a bird.
In human aviation, the design and integration of complex operational systems are hallmarks of foresight, purpose, and plan. But in a bird, could a purely materialistic process like natural selection account for the even higher levels of engineering required for flight?
No, and here's the problem. Natural selection is blind and unguided. It has no sense of direction, no sense of teleology is the big word that philosophers use. It doesn't know where it's going. The lack of foresight is the major problem. We know that if you throw all the parts for a 747 into the middle of a room and turn on a fan and blow everything around, you're not going to end up with a 747. We know it doesn't work that way, intuitively, even when you've got all the parts. Organisms are much more complicated than a 747. Much more complicated, and they're integrated wholes. They're not the sum of their parts. They are alive and responsive. And in terms of multicellular organisms, how that would have happened, I haven't a clue, just by purely naturalistic means.
Here's the bottom line. You look at the anatomy of a bird, its behavior, its metabolism, the structure of its feathers, the structure of its muscles, and so forth. These are multiple independent points in a complex space, out of which flight emerges. And I think from a biological standpoint, to fly at all requires a cause that's able to visualize a distant functional endpoint and bring together everything necessary to achieve that endpoint. Uniquely and universally in our experience, only intelligence is capable of that kind of causal process.
An engineered system is the product of a mind that anticipated a problem and figured out a multi-step way of addressing that problem. In birds, you see exactly that kind of process. I believe that intelligent design is the best explanation for avian flight because it's the best explanation for every other kind of flight that we see. So why would I suddenly change the rules when I go from a 747 to a pigeon? Their systems and their subsystems and the tolerances with which they operate, all of those things that are coordinated together, is just more incredible than anything that human beings have been able to achieve. They're engineering marvels. They're works of art. We know where engineered things come from. We know where works of art come from. So why would we attribute a bird to anything other than intelligence or mind?